What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back once again to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel. And I am back for one of two different lists that I'm doing as far as metal in 2021. And this one's a bit different because there was a period that during the summertime I wasn't really doing much of anything metal based on this channel, and that was mostly boiled down to the Marvel Studios Cup Series stuff that I was doing, so I didn't really get back into reviewing albums until tail end of the summer, early fall. So there was a lot of albums that I missed out on or forgot to review when the albums came out. Some of them I did do reviews for, like Dark Throne, At the Gates, Fear Factory, Nun Slaughter, but there was still a bunch of others I couldn't quite get to. So I'm here to let you guys know, with this list, I listened to 16 albums over the past week that I missed or forgot to review, and I am here to tell you guys my opinions about them, kind of like quick fire reviews of 16 albums in 2021 that I missed or didn't review. So how I'm doing this, I'm starting off with my lowest scoring album to my highest scoring album as far as the albums in question. So without further ado, let's get started, and starting off with a bit of controversy, first off at number 16, Cynic's Ascension Codes. So this is the fourth studio album from Cynic, one of the early progenitors of technical death metal, progressive death metal, whatever people want to call it. Of course, after their debut Focus, they were on a hiatus for a long time until the late 2000s when they had the album Traced in Air. I did review their previous album, Kindly Bent to Free Us, which I thought was solid. Here we get a new offering from Cynic. Now this one, it feels weird to have a Cynic album in today's day and age without two of the key members, Sean Malone and Sean Reinert, since they're both no longer with us. May they rest in peace. So this is all thrusted upon Paul Masvidal to find musicians to work with to make this album. Now, I will say, despite this one being my lowest scoring album, it's still a solid album. I just feel... Wow. I just wish that there could have been more variety in the songwriting as opposed to like just typical modern Cynic where it just feels like sci-fi based prog metal. I mean, the musicianship, top notch. I'm not taking anything away from the musicianship. Also, I do wish Paul could have used less of the vocal effects on his voice, because if you guys hear this guy sing without all those effects, he can sing. And I think he could have done this whole album without using those like sci-fi vocoder effects that he used to do back then when it was actually cool for him to use it. And especially with given how auto-tune is, it's not cool to be putting vocal coders on your singing patterns. It just makes it sound less genuine to me. But I mean, with Cynic, you could kind of give him a free pass with that because it's part of the mystique of the music, part of the whole sci-fi thing. However, I just wish Paul could have used less of that and emphasize his voice more prominently, because he can sing. So overall, I would give this album a 7.5 out of 10. I was very skeptical about listening to this album when it was announced, because it's like, well, how are you going to have Cynic exist without two of the key members that made the band what it was? Granted, it was better than I thought it was going to be, but I still feel like there could have been more done to the album to really propel it up the list for me. So coming in at number 15, Krypta's Echoes of the Soul. So Krypta is a Brazilian death metal band that features former members of another band we're going to talk about later on, Nervosa. Although here you got Dutch guitarist Sonia Anubis, one of the best guitar players on YouTube. And yeah, this is an all-ladies band. And this album feels like death thrash. Like, it's thrashy with the riffing and such, but it's still in the death metal spirit. Kind of like Vader, Malevolent Creation, that kind of style a little bit. Now, the songwriting and the music on this album is really solid. My biggest gripe I have with this album was the vocals. Like, it was way too much of like the high screeching vocals, almost a bit black metal-esque. And for me, it just wasn't performed to the best that it could have been. Of course, this is just one man's opinion. I know that if this band has another release coming out, maybe the vocals will be better. But the songwriting and the music on here is really, really good. And I think this was the first album from this band, or might have been the second. I completely forgot to look that up before recording this video. But I do think this band has a bright future. I just want them to not only improve the songwriting, but hopefully the vocals get a little bit better, because if I'm gonna be honest, the Nervosa album's vocals were a lot better than this, which is why I'm giving Echoes of the Soul by Krypta an 8 out of 10. Solid album, really, like I said, the music and the songwriting is really good. I just wish the vocals could have been executed just a little bit better. Moving on to the next album, we have, at number 14, Bleed the Future by Arkspire. So, Arkspire is a tech death band based out of West Coast Canada, Vancouver, BC, I believe. And from all that counts, they've been on a roll for the past couple of albums, kind of just trying to bring back the more wankery style of tech death, which, I'll be honest with you, when it comes down to tech death, when it gets too much into the wankery rather than the songwriting, it kind of turns me away from a lot of tech death at times. There are a lot of tech death bands I do enjoy, like Obscura, Dying Fetus, and Nile, because they're able to provide proper songwriting to their technical death metal wizardry. Whenever I hear a band like Origin, or Spawn of Possession, or even Arkspire, and I hear some of the parts in their songs and it just comes off as too wankery for my taste. But on this album, they're able to balance that a little bit better for Arkspire. They balance the wankery with proper songwriting. There's some brutal death moments on this album. There's even some old school death metal moments on this album. For me, though, the wankery on here was still a little bit too much for my taste. Of course, once again, all this is just my opinion. This is all one man's opinion, not true, or truthful, I should say. Just my opinion. I just felt that the wankery parts on the guitars and stuff was still a little too over the top for my taste. And for those reasons, I give this album another 8 out of 10. Still, really good album, because they were able to bring in more proper songwriting to their wankery. But again, that technical wankery that happens almost like 70% of this album just was still a little bit too much for my taste. But that's just me. So now moving into number 13, and now we're about to start getting into some same scores once again. Kicking things off at number 13, we have Unanimated's Victory in Blood. Now, this was the most recent one that came out. I think this came out last weekend. Unanimated, of course, Swedish band that combines melodic death metal and black metal. Kind of like Dissection or Sacramentum, Dawn, and even the German band Thalkandra, which I reviewed their last album this year. So Unanimated kind of fits into that bill. On this album, however, when I listened to it, there was more black metal than melodic death metal, even though there are some death metal sections in a lot of the songs whenever I listened to this album. Definitely the black metal vibe was more prevalent on this album than anything else. Especially even in the vocals, they kind of fit more along the lines of bands like Dark Funeral or Nagelfar, those kind of bands, rather than like a Thomas Lindberg At the Gates or what have you. But overall, I really like this sinister, evil tone that this album was able to project to me. And I believe this was only their 4th studio album, and they've been going since the early 90s. Well, they started in the early 90s, and then went through a breakup, and now they're back. Something along those lines in terms of the backstory behind this band. But regardless of all that, the music itself was pretty damn energetic, pretty damn atmospheric, and really evil. And after all, when you're a band that's combining melodic death metal and black metal, you're bound to get some of those elements mashed up together, and for the most part done relatively well. Which is why I give Victory in Blood by Unanimated an 8.5 out of 10. Really good stuff. And I look forward to seeing, if they continue the path that they're on, I look forward to what they have in store for the next release. Moving on to number 12, I'm going to be talking about a newer band, Rise to the Sky, Let Me Drown With You. Of course, for those of you who watch the Horseman podcast will know that my co-host, Ricky, a.k.a. Horror Master, is a huge Death Doom fan and recently discovered Rise to the Sky. And this was actually my first time listening to them, and Metal Archives described them as atmospheric Death Doom. Pretty damn appropriate because there are some melodic moments, there's some funeral doom elements at times, but as far as like describing it as atmospheric Death Doom, can't put it into better words than that, because holy shit, this album is heavy, it is dark, there's good amount of melody in here, and I love the ambience that's going on in the background of the music. And of course, it's just slow and low end going on, and the vocals go down to almost the deepest realms you could imagine for a Death Doom band. There are moments on this album that reminded me of bands like Disembowelment, Swallow the Sun at times, even a little bit of like slower Hooded Menace to some degree, because there are some heavy riffs going on this album, but again, there's a good amount of melody too that can kind of harken back to a band like Swallow the Sun for me. And to think this is a one-man band, this one guy, I believe his name is Sergio, because his band is from Chile, and he plays everything flawlessly. Bass, guitars, drums, the other instruments, and solid death metal vocalist too. So this album, for my first experience with Rise to the Sky, I'm giving this one an 8.5 out of 10. I do feel like it was a little bit too ambitious for my taste, because this is about an hour long, and it was like 7-8 songs, and a couple of them kind of went a little bit too long. But hey, it's atmospheric Death Doom, it's going to be slow and low. What else should I expect? Now we're into the top 10. At number 10, I'm going to talk about Evergray's Escape of the Phoenix. So, I reviewed Evergray's last album, I believe, when it came out in 2019, I want to say. Yeah, 2019 was when I reviewed the last album. But here we are in 2021 with a new album, Escape of the Phoenix. Of course, Swedish progressive power metal band that kind of started to incorporate a little bit of the 7/8 string guitar sound, but they use it very, very, very sparingly on this album. But the melodies are quite powerful on this album. Kind of a continuation of their last album, which I thought their last album was absolutely amazing. Here, it definitely felt like a tiny regression a little bit. I don't think it was quite as good as their last album, but it's still a really good piece of work. Of course, we get a guest spot from James Labrie from Dream Theater doing guest vocals on one of the tracks off of this album, and for progressive power metal that's trying to incorporate a little bit of a modern sound and a modern heaviness to it, this didn't do half bad of a job. Like I said, the style kind of regressed a little bit to me as far as quality from the previous album to here, but I can't deny Escape of the Phoenix was A really damn good progressive power metal album, and for that I give it an 8.5 out of 10. So if you're a fan of progressive power metal and you're a fan of using sparingly 7/8 string guitars, you'll definitely dig this album for damn sure. So now moving on to the next album on my list, and it is another recent one that came out just a few weeks ago, and one I was intending on reviewing entirely on the channel, but I kind of slept on it. Rhapsody of Fire's Glory of Salvation. So, of course, Rhapsody of Fire, legendary symphonic power metal band from Italy, formed by Luca Turilli, and they've had amazing musicians come into the band. I reviewed their last album, The Eighth Mountain, back in 2019, and that actually wound up being near my album of the year list. It was an amazing album. Here, with Glory for Salvation, however, I don't, again, kind of like with the Evergray album, I felt like this one just wasn't quite as good as The Eighth Mountain, but it's still a really, really good album. Songs like Abyss of Pain 2, which was a sequel to an instrumental track, like an introduction track they did on The Eighth Mountain, I believe. They decided to make a 10.5-minute second part of that, and it was epic, it was dark, it was heavy. My only real complaint about the album is that sometimes when those symphonic elements come in, the guitars kind of get a little bit lost in the shuffle at times when those orchestral elements come in. Yeah, the guitars get a little bit quiet to the orchestra stuff, but whenever you hear the guitars by themselves, there are some really heavy riffs going on this album. Of course, it gets very fast at times, but they are able to bring it down tempo at times. And also, I love how they keep some of the folky elements on a couple of tracks alive from The Eighth Mountain, like that song Warrior's Heart. I love that song for the folk approach that they went for. But for Glory for Salvation, I give this one an 8.5 out of 10. Really good album. Again, kind of falls in quality a little bit compared to The Eighth Mountain for me, but it doesn't take away from the fact that Rhapsody of Fire is still firing on all cylinders and pumping out some really good music. So now, moving into... where are we now? Number 9. Yeah, number 9. We get into... I talked about them briefly during the Krypta portion. We're going to talk about them now. The new album from Nervosa, Perpetual Chaos. Originally a Brazilian thrash metal band that now has only one Brazilian member. You got a Spanish member, an Italian member, and a... fuck. Again, I didn't quite prepare for this too well, but hopefully you guys will forgive me and still enjoy what I say. But with this album, Nervosa, Perpetual Chaos, yeah, they got Diva Satanica, as well as Mia Wallace, who was in Abath and actually was in a relationship with Tom G. Warrior. So, But regardless of all that, this album came out earlier in the year, and I listened to it a little while ago, and I was surprised at the energy that this album was able to show off, and the vocals. Like I talked about with the Krypta album, I felt the vocals were not that great. Here, Diva Satanica's vocals are just, wow, she can growl, she can scream, and from all that counts from, behind the scenes I've seen of her on, Instagram and stuff, she can properly sing, too. Here, this was mostly her doing, black metal and death metal vocals. Kind of giving off a bit of, a blackened death thrash feel. And hell, even one of the songs you get an appearance from Schmear of Destruction. And I thought he and Diva Satanica were able to sing together quite well. Again, the high energy that this album has, it's just wowzers. Just wowzers. Again, better than the Krypta album, but again, like, some parts of this album to me felt a little bit inconsistent. And also, like, this is the first album with a completely different lineup of the band. So I feel like if this lineup sticks for another album, I think it'll blow this album completely out of the water. But Nervosa Perpetual Chaos, I give this one an 8.5 out of 10. Really good death thrash with a bit of a blackened feel on top of it, and I look forward to hearing what these ladies have in store next. So now, moving into number 8 on the list, and this one was one of the big ones that I just kept sleeping on, and that is Gojira's Fortitude. Now, I'm a big fan of Gojira, particularly their old stuff like The Link, From Mars to Sirius, Way of All Flesh, and Le Font Sauvage. I liked Magma when it came out 5 years ago. I think I may have reviewed that album. I'm pretty certain I did. So it's been 5 years since we had a Gojira album, and when I heard Gojira was putting out new music, I was excited. But yet when the album came out, it was just getting overshadowed by so many other albums like Cannibal Corpse, for instance. So I didn't really give this album a chance. I didn't listen to it until this past week. And this album, I feel like this album was kind of like a tale of 2/3. Or not, or a tale of 3/3. Like the first third kind of was bouncing back and forth in terms of consistency or inconsistencies. Like, Born for One Thing was a really good song. Amazonia, meh. And then the next couple of tracks really propelled things. But then the middle two songs, I really wasn't feeling it. But then the rest of the album fucking punches you right in the face. So, despite the inconsistencies that this album has, and also a bit of a change up in direction, kind of trying to go back a little bit to the magic of an album like Le Font Sauvage, but for me, I felt like at times they were trying a little bit too hard to try and pull that sound off. This was kind of like a mixture of Magma and Le Font Sauvage kind of combined on this album, and for me, kind of mixed results, but for the most part, a lot of the songs on here were great. A couple of them, just weird, like the middle two songs, I didn't get fully on board with it, but it still doesn't take away from the fact that Fortitude by Gojira is a really good album. I'm just hoping that on a next album they put out, they can improve upon what they were trying to do here, which is why I give this album another 8.5 out of 10. Yeah, you're noticing a lot of albums getting the same scores. That's just the way I work. But we are now out of the 8.5s and 7 albums left to talk about. Moving on to number 7 on my list, I'm going to talk about Frozen Soul's album, Crypt of Ice. I listened to this one last night because I watched Thralls of Metal do the review of this album last night as well, and I thought, this sounds enticing, and this is a debut as well. This is a debut album from a new band, death metal band out of Fort Worth, Texas, that's very much inspired by Bolt Thrower. Very much inspired by Bolt Thrower, and this album kind of check marks pretty much everything old school death metal has to offer, but bringing in a little bit of like that modern, almost like hardcore feel, kind of like a band like Gatecreeper, for example, that kind of bring in a little bit of like a hardcore edge to their death metal style. But here, those hardcore elements are very minimal, kind of like how Gatecreeper does it. Here, this is very much like mid-tempo, meat and potatoes, old school death metal, very much in the line of bands like Bolt Thrower, and even some Asphyx here and there as well. And I love how the vocals kind of sound like Carl Willits to some degree, like old Carl Willits, not modern Carl Willits, which I'll be talking about him very shortly. More, at least. But I loved how the production, it still retains a bit of grit, but still maintaining a bit of that modern sound and modern feel. So overall, top to bottom with Krypta, I thought this was a great album. Sure, some people, this album I saw, it was very split on Metal Archives. Like, a lot of people liked it. Some people absolutely hated this album because of the whole Bolt Thrower worship. If you're going to worship a band like Bolt Thrower, you're good in my eyes, because Bolt Thrower is a hell of a band, and if you're a death metal band, why not borrow some moments of Bolt Thrower to make you sound fresh? And the way they do it, the way they do the Bolt Thrower worship, doesn't sound completely derivative. It does have some moments where it sounds like it could have been written in 2021, and for those reasons I give Krypta by Frozen Soul 9 out of 10. Really fucking great album, no complaints whatsoever. So now, speaking of Bolt Thrower and Carl Willits, that gets me in the number 6, To the End by Memorium. So, I think I talked about their last album that came out in 2019, and here we get a new release. Of course, Memorium... Oh, I need a drink. Of course, Memorium was a band formed by Carl Willits after Bolt Thrower broke up 5 years ago. Mostly this band is in spirit of a tribute to Martin Kearns, Kitty, their old drummer from Bolt Thrower. And we get another offering from them. While I listened to the other Memorium stuff, and I felt like it just was missing some of that, like, epic energy of Bolt Thrower. Here with this new album, To the End, it sounds like they finally got that energy back and more of the epic quality that I like about old Bolt Thrower. Granted, Carl Willits' vocal style now is a lot different. He's not really doing the low growling anymore. He's doing almost like mid-ranged yelling, almost, which can be a bit of a turnoff at times, because it's like, you've heard Carl Willits in the past sing a lot better than this. You would wish he can go back to that style, and I think he can, but I can appreciate him trying to experiment with his vocal style, and I think for the most part it paid off. It didn't take away from the music, because the music, holy shit, this album feels like it could have been like a Bolt Thrower album released between Honor, Valor, Pride, and Those Once Loyal. It kind of sits in between those two albums, so to speak. And I give this one a 9 out of 10 as well. This is masterful, and I look forward to what they can do on their next release, if we get another one. 5 more to go. Moving into the next one, I'm talking about Hannes Grossman and his new solo album, To Where the Light Retreats. I believe I reviewed the last Hannes Grossman solo album that came out in 2019, and I thought that was fantastic stuff. Here, the fantastic music continues for Hannes Grossman's solo project, because holy shit, you want to talk about diversifying songwriting compared to the last one? Like, the last one, I really liked the overall tech death feel of it. Here, a lot of songs get broken up into like different styles. You get some of the tech death stuff, you get some progressive death metal stuff, some death thrash, some old school death metal. It goes all over the place, kind of like the new Obscura album, where it almost feels like a death metal sampler platter, almost. It's kind of the vibe that I get from this new Hannes Grossman solo album, and I mean, Hannes is a busy bee, you know, doing his solo stuff, also in Alkaloid, Eternity's End, Triptychon, Blotted Science. He's everywhere. He's a busy dude, but for as busy as he is, still a hell of a drummer and a great songwriter as well. And this album continuing the path that I first heard him on with the last solo album 2 years ago. Here it was definitely lyrically a little less comedic, definitely more serious, a little bit darker as well. And I really liked how... I actually am going to say this was better than the last solo album in my personal opinion. I give this one a 9 out of 10 as well. Just fantastic work from one of the best drummers going in metal for the past almost 20 years, give or take. So yeah, kudos to you, Hannes. Now moving into the next one, and this was the first time I listened to a full album from this band that's used to be from Kentucky, now up in Minnesota, Panopticon, and again into the light. So, another one of my co-hosts from the Horseman podcast, Hannah Klein, she has been wanting me to check out Panopticon for so long, despite the fact that I'm not the world's biggest black metal fan. I do enjoy black metal, but when it comes to like atmospheric black, it can be hit or miss for me. But when I listened to this album, granted it was long, but holy shit did this feel like an epic journey of an album. And the thing that I actually really liked about this, for this being my first Panopticon album I've heard, is that there's some death metal moments in here, like with the blast beats. Even Austin Lund's voice gets a little lower into the more guttural vocals at times. But the atmospheric black metal style with a bit of that folky vibe is still not lost in this album. It definitely carries on that spirit, but it sounds like Austin wanted to add other metal influences. Like, there's a little bit of classic metal at times, but there's a lot of death metal on here too. And I really, really like that fusion that Austin's going for on this album. Like I said, it was a long one, well over an hour, but man, what an epic journey it was. It was just mind-bogglingly amazing. I actually might buy this album eventually, and I give this one a 9 out of 10 as well. For my first experience fully head-on with Panopticon, I thought this was fantastic, fan-fucking-tastic music. 3 albums left, heading into my number 3. It's another band that I've gotten the pleasure to listen to a full album of theirs, Chemist, and their new album, Deceiver. So, Chemist, a doom metal band from Colorado, I believe, and they've been going strong from what I've heard over the past couple of albums, and I've been hearing a lot of noise about this band, so I decided with their new album, and I completely slept on it, figured I'd give it a shot, and I was not ready for how masterfully done their brand of doom metal was going to be. And I like how it kind of has a similar vibe to like the new Hooded Menace album, where there's some classic heavy metal tones coming in, but there's even moments when I was listening, especially on the first couple of songs, there was some black metal and some death metal moments, like where they would get into a blast beat or speed things up just a little bit to like thrashy territory at times, and the vocals doing the high black metal shriek and the low death metal growl. But for the most part, it's very much like a classic heavy metal / doom metal album. To me, this kind of sounds like a mixture of like Alice in Chains, Black Sabbath, and maybe a little bit of Woods of Ypres, just a little bit. At least from the way, and even a little bit of like Miles Kennedy in the vocals a little bit. There's moments where the vocals remind me a lot of Miles Kennedy from Alter Bridge. But yeah, this was a pleasant surprise for me. I was not expecting how incredible this album was, and I think it's only 6 songs. So despite the length being over 40 minutes, it's an easy listen. It is so, so good. 9 out of 10 for Deceiver by Chemist. I might actually buy this one as well because I was pleasantly surprised. But we got 2 more left. Coming in at number 2, 1914's Where Fear and Weapons Meet. So, didn't know about this band in 1914. They're a Ukrainian blackened death doom band that sang mostly about World War I, hence the band name 1914, the year WW1 began. And this was another album that was recommended to me by Hannah Klein on Instagram, like asking me about this band and how I feel about black metal bands doing more World War I lyrics and so on and so forth, and I just didn't have an opinion because I hadn't heard it. However, with this album, again, kind of like the Chemist album, I was blown away as to how masterfully crafted these songs were put together. I love that fusion that I got here with the black metal production value with the death doom aesthetic on top. And you even get Nick Holmes from Bloodbath and Paradise Lost to guest appear on one of the tracks. And I love how epic it feels. Like, there's a lot of, like, those epic war moments that show up on here. And even a couple of tracks with, like, war folk songs, or whatever you call it. But it's heavy, it's brooding, it's murky. Name any adjective you can think of that can describe a heavy, brutal, grim, cold, World War I themed Black and Death Doom album. Because, oh man, because I can't think of any others off the top of my head that could do this album justice. This one might actually make my top 10 for the album of the year list I got coming up soon. 9.5 out of 10. This is another one I'm planning on getting because, holy shit, the atmosphere, the brutality that this album was able to project was just... But that leaves us with only one number one, and this is an album that I slept on for a while, and I don't know why, because holy shit, I'm going to go ahead and say this is a perfect album, 10 out of 10. Colors 2 by Between the Buried and Me. I mean, Between the Buried and Me, I've heard a few songs of theirs, but they were always a band that kind of went over my head as far as progressive metal or progressive death metal, whatever you want to call them. And when I heard that they were doing a sequel to their classic album, Colors 1, it's like, this is intriguing. And then after watching the review from Thralls of Metal, it's like, okay, at some point I need to spend time on this album, and thank God I did, because for my first full-on experience with Between the Buried and Me, I was absolutely impressed and blown away by how well crafted these songs were, and that they were able to make a 15-minute song feel more like a 7 to 8 minute song. The musicianship on point, the riffs, there are some amazing riffs on here, great drum moments, great bass moments, and Tommy Giles Rogers showcasing his vocal talents. He can do the death metal stuff, he can sing mid-register stuff, and I like how sometimes his clean vocals remind me a little bit of James LaBrie of Dream Theater. Like, holy shit, this guy, Tommy Rogers, fucking hell of a vocalist. And I'm smiling because I'm smirking a lot, because it's like, how else can I describe this album? I can't do it justice, because just gotta listen to it to kind of figure it out all for yourself. But like I said, a 10 out of 10, brilliant. I actually have this album coming in the mail tomorrow. I can't wait to get it. It's gonna be fantastic. And this album is for sure going to be a top 10, maybe even a number 1 contender for the album of the year list. However, I gotta re-listen to it as well as the other ones to really make a true decision about it. And that does it for this list of 16 albums that I missed or forgot to review. What did you guys think of all these albums I brought up? Let me know in the comments below. As far as what's coming up, well, this Sunday, the Horseman Podcast is doing the album of the year list, but before that, I'm doing my top 20. So you'll get double lists coming up this week. I do have another retro review planned, as well as another episode of the Beginner series. I'm still trying to figure out what genre I want to tackle next. But until next time, horns high, and I will see you soon.
Tails, do you know how to use
Dude,
it?
really? I was literally in the freaking menu. God.
Ow!
I literally just freaking spawned.
Well, Tails, time to die.
No one isn't! No one isn't!
Why is everybody coming over here?
Yeah, wait.
No!
What?
We're gonna have a nice day.
We're not
together.
open
Is this
right
our
now.
first date?
We're not open here, mister. Damn it! What the? No fire!
I died from my own grenade!
Can the fire go away, please? Thank you.
taking the big
Oh my.
The pigeon struck again!